We begin at Maplewood Drive, a typical suburban street. Two-story homes with cracked vinyl, lawns browned by last year's drought, and kids' bikes strewn across driveways. The air is crisp with that autumn chill as pumpkins sit lopsided on porches, some carved, others waiting. A truck rumbles by, muffler rattling. This is Hilliard, Ohio, middle class, neither rich nor poor, where people go to work, come home, and try to keep the bills down. David Grayson pulls into his driveway at 6:15 p.m., tossing his orange vest into his old truck. He sits quietly for a moment, staring at the garage door. Stuck since at 22. At 38, his broad shoulders are beginning to round, and his beard hides the wrinkles from a life spent working hard under the sun. He's a quiet guy, reliable, always on time, never expecting thanks. Inside, the house smells of stale coffee and whatever Kelly heated up for the kids. The living room is a mess. A sagging sofa, monster cans on the coffee table, and a half-finished Lego spaceship. The TV's on, low, showing a home renovation show. David kicks off his dusty boots and tosses his keys on the counter. "Kel!" he calls, his voice rough from a long day. No answer. He checks the time, 6:17. She's already at the bar, working the night shift again. He grabs a beer from the fridge and takes a long sip, feeling the cold foam hit his dry throat. Upstairs, Ethan, 10, is glued to his Nintendo Switch. Sophie, 6, hums in her room, surrounded by Barbies. David stops at Sophie's door. "Have you eaten?" he asks. She beams. "Mom made mac and cheese. I ate 2 bowls." David smiles and moves on. Ethan's still fixated on his game. "Hey, food," David says. "Mom left something in the microwave." Ethan barely glances up. "I'll eat later." David frowns. "Eat now." Ethan groans and drags himself downstairs. David watches, then returns to his beer. This is their rhythm. David and the kids hold down the fort while Kelly works nights at the Rusty Tap. The bar's better money and things are tight. New tires for the truck, school fees, a dying water heater. The night shifts take a toll on everyone. Across town, the Rusty Tap is alive. Neon signs flicker. The jukebox plays Springsteen, a familiar hum in the background. Kelly, 35, stands behind the counter wiping it down. She's still got it. Dark hair and a messy bun, green eyes that light up when she smiles. She's got the look, the charm, enough to keep the tips coming. "Another one, Jimmy?" she asks, nodding toward a regular. He slides his glass toward her, a little more than half empty. "Flattery will get you an extra ice cube," she says, pouring him a double. The Rusty Tap is far from glamorous. Sticky floors, crooked pool tables, a toilet that smells of bleach, and worse. But it's hers. She knows everyone's drink, their stories, the dumb jokes. A little flirtation here and there to keep the tips flowing. But she knows where to draw the line. David trusts her. What else can he do? She's his wife. But the nights drag on. By 11 p.m., Kelly's feet were aching, and the crowd had thinned to the stubborn few who weren't ready to leave. She glanced at her phone, seeing messages from David, routine stuff about the kids, or reminders like, "Don't forget the milk." She quickly responded with a thumbs up and slid the phone back into her pocket. Same old routine, but lately it felt heavier, like a weight she couldn't shake. Another drink, another forced joke, and she wondered when life had become so predictable. At home, David sat on the couch, cracking open his second beer. The kids were either in bed or quiet enough to make the house feel empty. He flipped through his phone, weather updates, a work message about a demolition job next week. He thought about texting Kelly, but what was there to say? "I miss you?" She'd laugh, probably call him soft. Instead, he set the phone down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge. Silence didn't bother him. He'd grown up with it. His father, a welder, was always on the road, and his mom worked double shifts at a diner. David learned to take care of himself. Now, with a family, a house, and a steady job, he had what he needed. But Kelly wanted more. A bigger house, trips they couldn't afford, a life without late-night cleanups. He'd nod and say, "Someday," but he didn't know how to get there. It was almost 10 p.m. She'd be home by 2:30, maybe 3. If she worked late, he'd be asleep by the time she got back, up at 5 for his shift. He crushed the beer can and tossed it in the trash. It hit the edge and fell to the floor. He didn't pick it up. Tomorrow, he thought. Everything always waited for tomorrow. Saturday morning came gray, with low clouds hanging over Hilliard, threatening rain. It was quiet on Maplewood, except for a distant dog barking and the wind rustling the leaves. David was in the garage, fiddling with the lawnmower. The old Briggs & Stratton engine, inherited from the previous owner, was on its last legs. He squatted on the floor, surrounded by tools, his hands stained with oil, focused only on the task. There was peace in this moment, brief as it was. Kelly left around noon, wearing a faded Ohio State sweatshirt and jeans. Her Chevy Malibu wouldn't start that morning, just a click when she turned the key. She figured it was the battery, but wasn't sure. David was busy with the mower, and he hated messing with cars. So instead of dealing with it, she walked across the street to Mark Taylor's house. Mark had moved in recently, buying the house from the Millers. He was about 40, tall, with dark hair going gray at the temples. He worked as a mechanic, and his Dodge Ram was always parked outside, covered in oil stains. The neighbors knew him as a guy who'd help with anything, mowing lawns, shoveling snow. He was always ready with a lazy smile, his eyes sharp and curious. Kelly knocked on his door. Mark opened it almost immediately, holding a beer, a football game playing on the TV behind him. "Kelly," he said with a smirk. "What's up?" "My car died," she said, nodding toward her Malibu. "I think it's the battery. Can you check it out?" He leaned against the doorframe, sipping his beer. "But it'll cost you." She rolled her eyes, but smiled. "I used to work at the bar. Are you really going to send me a bill? I thought neighbors helped each other out." "Discount for pretty neighbors," he said with a wink, stepping outside and slamming the door behind him. "Let's see what's wrong with your junk." Mark popped the hood of Kelly's Malibu, and she stood off to the side, arms crossed. He hooked up the tester, frowned, and poked around with a screwdriver. His movements were quick and practiced, like he'd done this countless times before. Kelly noticed the scar on his wrist, long and jagged, but didn't ask about it. "The battery's fine," he said, stepping back. "The starter's the issue. It's probably clicking when you try to start it, right?" "Yeah," she nodded. "Expensive to fix?" he asked, wiping oil off his hands with his jeans. "I have a spare starter at home," he said. "I can put it in tomorrow morning. I'm in the middle of the game right now." She chuckled. "Sorry for interrupting your sacred football time." "No problem," he said, stepping a little closer. "I can miss a few goals for you." Kelly felt a flush but didn't pull away. She met his gaze. "Be careful, Mark. I'm married." "I know," he grinned. "But you came over here, didn't you? I'm just helping." She laughed loudly, like she would at a bar after a dumb joke. "Okay, hero." "When can you fix it?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning. Bring coffee, and I'll take care of it." "We have a deal," she said, already turning to leave. "Just don't expect me to bake you a pie." "I wouldn't say no," he called after her, his laugh fading as the door slammed shut. Back at home, Kelly still had a small smile on her lips. Inside, the house was warm and smelled like leftover coffee. She tossed her sweatshirt on the couch and walked into the kitchen, where David had already moved out of the garage. He was washing his hands at the sink, a towel slung over his shoulder, a freshly opened beer on the table. "Where were you?" he asked, without looking up. "Mark's," she said, grabbing a water from the fridge. "The car wouldn't start. It's the starter. He'll fix it tomorrow." David nodded, turning to wipe his hands. He glanced at her quickly, noticing something in her voice, something more relaxed about her stance. She seemed lighter, almost like she had just heard a good joke. "Fatigue," he muttered, brushing it off. "We're both tired, that's all." "Did he charge you?" David asked, breaking the silence. "Nothing," she shrugged, taking a sip of water. "He's got a spare part. I just need to bring him coffee." David sat at the table, half listening. "Generous guy." "Yeah," she said, grinning. "Neighborhood solidarity." David watched her as she moved around the kitchen, fixing her hair and humming under her breath. Something was different about her today, but he couldn't quite place it. Maybe it was just the car getting fixed for free, or maybe he was overthinking. "You okay?" he asked, almost absent-mindedly. She froze for a second before turning to face him, eyebrow raised. "Yeah, why?" "You just seem more cheerful than usual," he said. "Maybe because I'm not behind the bar," she replied with a teasing tone. "Or maybe because you don't have to spend half your paycheck on a car." "Maybe," he nodded, accepting the answer, nothing more to say. Kelly went upstairs to check on the kids, and David sat with his beer, feeling like he was missing something. He finished the can, crushed it, and threw it away, this time hiding it. Tomorrow, Mark fixes the car, he thought. It'll be fine. Or so he thought. A week later, Mark had fixed the car, and David was in the yard when Kelly and Mark wrapped up. Kelly was laughing, coffee mug in hand, while Mark worked under the car. David nodded to Mark as he climbed out, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Thanks, man," David said, shaking Mark's hand. "No problem," Mark replied. "Get in touch if you need anything." The car started on the first try and everything seemed fine. But soon, Kelly started mentioning Mark more. On Monday, she casually mentioned borrowing a screwdriver from him because the doorknob was loose. She returned with the tool and a bag of cookies from Mark, claiming his sister had baked too many. David didn't think much of it, though the thought nagged at him. Half an hour for a screwdriver? But he dismissed it. On Wednesday night, after dinner, Kelly walked across the street again. "I'm going to see Mark," she called from the doorway. "He's going to check the coffee maker." Then she slammed the door before he could respond. David stared at the closed door, the coffee maker's hum still ringing in his ears. It had been a month, and they had just gotten used to it. He pulled back the curtain and saw Kelly walk into Mark's house across the street. Her silhouette flashed in the doorway, and she came back 40 minutes later, smiling that same easy smile she had a week ago. "What about the coffee maker?" he asked as she kicked off her sneakers. "Just a filter issue," she said, shrugging. "Mark said he'll fix it tomorrow if we bring it over." "Tomorrow?" David raised an eyebrow. "Is he our personal repair guy now?" Kelly laughed and headed into the kitchen for water. "He's just helping out." David followed her, tone sharp. "It's odd that you're over there so often." "Twice a week isn't every day," she said with a slight challenge in her voice. "Relax. He's just a neighbor." David bit back a response, sitting on the couch. Sophie ran up and handed him a drawing, but the aftertaste lingered. Kelly was right. Twice a week wasn't every day, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way she talked about Mark, casual, too easy, like he was already part of their routine. By Friday, David's suspicions were growing. Kelly left for a rare day shift at the Rusty Tap. With rain delaying work, David decided to clean out the garage. As he was rummaging through boxes, he heard Mark's Dodge pull up. Mark got out, stretched, and glanced across the street. They exchanged a nod, just a simple hello. But then Mark walked to his mailbox, and David noticed the coffee maker sitting on Mark's porch. It was the same one Kelly had claimed she didn't bring the night before. David froze, staring at it. He walked across the street, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Hey, Mark, is that our coffee maker?" Mark looked at it and shrugged. "Yeah, Kelly brought it over last night." "She said you'd fix it last night," David said, his frown deepening. "Kelly came by while I was ordering pizza. She said you were busy with the kids and asked me to take a look. I didn't have time yet." David nodded, though something didn't sit right. He hadn't been busy with the kids. He'd been watching TV with Kelly until she fell asleep. Why would she lie about that? He forced a smile. "Okay, thanks. We'll figure it out." "No problem," Mark said, clapping him on the shoulder before heading inside. David grabbed the coffee maker and went back to the garage, setting it on the workbench. He stared at it, wondering why Kelly had lied about what happened. Maybe she just forgot, or maybe he was overthinking it. That evening, Kelly returned from work, throwing her bag by the door. David cooked pasta with jarred sauce. Simple, but the kids liked it. Kelly ruffled Sophie's hair and slumped into a chair. "It was a hell of a day," she said, rubbing her neck. "Some guy spilled beer on the counter and complained about me working too slow." David glanced at her, stirring the sauce. "I grabbed the coffee maker from Mark." Kelly froze for a second, then nodded. "Oh, yeah, I brought it in last night. I forgot to tell you." "Did he fix it?" "No. He said you came in while he was ordering pizza." David crossed his arms. "He said I was busy with the kids." Kelly laughed lightly and looked away. "Well, I didn't want to bother you. You and Sophie were watching something, right?" "I watched it with you," David corrected, his voice steady but carrying a shadow. "You fell asleep. I woke you up, and you went to bed." She shrugged, giving him a forced smile. "Oh, I got it wrong. I was tired. My brain's all over the place. The main thing is, there's a coffee maker at home, right?" David nodded, returning to the stove. "Yeah, the main thing is, you're home." "For what?" she asked, a little defensive. David didn't press. She was tired. It happened. The kids sat down, and dinner continued as usual. Sophie talked about school. Ethan complained about homework. Kelly cracked jokes about moving to a place with no teachers. David ate in silence, watching her. She seemed the same, tired, a little irritable. But something was off, like a shadow flickering in the corner of his vision, vanishing when he turned to look. After the kids were in bed, David stepped outside for a rare smoke, his nerves getting the best of him. He watched Mark's house across the street, the lights on and shadows shifting behind the curtains. Maybe it was just pizza, football, and loneliness, or maybe something more. He exhaled slowly, his mind still buzzing about the coffee maker. Tomorrow, he'd ask again, or maybe not. He wasn't sure yet, but the quiet doubts lingered. The evening was damp, rain falling all day and leaving a wet chill in the air. David was heading out for an unexpected night shift, an urgent call about a collapsed section of road. He grabbed his F-150 and left around 6, tossing a quick "be back in the morning" to Kelly. The house was quiet. Sophie was cuddled with her bunny, and Ethan was already asleep with his Switch on the nightstand. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the soft patter of rain on the windows. Kelly sat on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through TikTok. She had gotten off early from the bar. Barely anyone showed up due to the weather. And now she felt restless, her mind unsettled. After a moment, she got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. Across the street, Mark's garage was dimly lit. The door was slightly open, and she could hear the faint clink of metal. Without much thought, she put on sneakers, grabbed an umbrella for show, and stepped into the rain. She crossed the street, knocked on Mark's garage door, and waited. A few seconds later, Mark appeared, oil-stained shirt and wrench in hand, a lazy grin on his face. "Kelly," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's up? Something broke again?" "No," she said, stepping inside and folding the umbrella. "Just bored. The house is quiet. David's on shift. The kids are asleep." Mark raised an eyebrow, throwing the rag onto the workbench and leaning against it. The garage smelled of gasoline and metal, cluttered with tools and old parts. He crossed his arms, eyeing her. "You're bored?" he asked. "And you thought I'd come entertain you?" She chuckled, giving him a slow, teasing look. Mark smirked. "I can entertain, but you're married, Kel. Or is that not a thing anymore?" She paused, meeting his gaze. The air between them thickened. Then she shrugged nonchalantly. "It counts, but that's not why I'm here. I just needed something different." He stretched out the word. "Different, huh?" Then he motioned to the workbench. "Hold this for me." He handed her a screwdriver, and she stepped closer, standing next to him as he worked on a rusty carburetor. His hands moved with confidence, strong and calloused, and she couldn't help but watch. The garage was silent except for the sound of tools and the rain, but the tension grew. She could feel his warmth beside her, the sharp scent of oil in the air. "You're always so quiet?" she asked, trying to break the silence. "Only when there's someone nearby who talks too much," he said, glancing at her with a sly smile. "But you're not one of those people." "Not one of those," she agreed, her voice softer now. She put down the screwdriver, crossed her arms, and leaned a little closer. "Which one are you, Mark?" He straightened up and dropped the wrench on the table, closing the space between them. "One of those who doesn't refuse when it's offered." Before she could respond, he grabbed her by the waist, pulling her close. She didn't pull away. Her hands rested on his chest, gripping his shirt as the kiss came quickly, urgent, like something that had been building up for longer than either of them wanted to admit. The rain softened everything else. In the cramped garage, they moved with a raw urgency, the world outside fading. It was messy, impulsive, an escape from the routine. When it was over, Mark stepped back, flushed, but without regret. He grabbed a beer from the shelf, cracked it open, and took a sip, offering it to her. She shook her head, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Was the distraction worth it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She chuckled dryly. "I guess so." He nodded toward the door. Until next time. Kelly grabbed her umbrella and walked out into the rain, not looking back. Her clothes were soaked, but there was no rush. The house was as quiet as before, but now the silence felt different, heavier. She stripped off her wet clothes, showered quickly, and got into bed. Her heart was still racing, but her mind was blank. Mark finished his beer, turned off the garage light, and let the silence settle. The garage, now cold and cluttered, returned to its usual state. No more thoughts, just the satisfaction of a task done. Meanwhile, David woke early, still feeling the weight of his night shift. He lay there, listening to Kelly's soft breathing, her tired mutterings from the night before. He didn't wake her. Instead, he lay still beside her and drifted back to sleep. It was his rare day off, the kids still asleep, and for once there was no rush. He got up, dressed casually, and went downstairs. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the gray light through the curtains. The coffee maker sat there, still broken, and though Kelly had promised Mark would fix it, nothing had been done. David turned it on, heard it hum, and then turned it off. "To hell with it," he muttered, reaching for the instant coffee. As he waited for the water to heat, he looked out the window. Across the street, he saw Mark taking out the trash, Kelly following behind in the same sweatshirt from the past week. They exchanged words, and as Mark tossed the bag, he casually rested his hand on her shoulder. David's heart raced at the sight. Kelly laughed, brushing his hand off, but it didn't seem like a big deal to her. Mark stood there, watching her walk back, his lazy grin still in place. David stood frozen, watching her walk back across the street. His chest tightened. When she reached the porch, he could hear the lock click as she entered the house. His stomach twisted, the image of Mark's hand on her shoulder lingering in his mind. "Are you up already?" Kelly's cheerful voice broke the silence as she walked into the kitchen. Her hair was tangled, and she rubbed her eyes, still waking up. "I thought you'd be asleep after last night." He didn't turn around immediately. His fists clenched, then relaxed as he forced himself to breathe. He turned to face her, keeping his expression blank. "I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "Do you want some coffee?" "Yeah, if this thing works," he replied. She nodded, settling into a chair. Mark had it. He said the filter was clogged, but he didn't have time to fix it. "I should just get a new one." David nodded, but felt a flicker of anger. His hands moved automatically as he poured the instant coffee, his mind racing. Mark had just touched her, laughed with her. He placed the mug in front of her, spilling a couple of drops, and sat down. "You go see him often?" he asked, his voice sharp. She looked up, shrugging. "Not often. He's nearby, and you don't like tinkering with things." "I don't like it," he agreed, still watching her. "And Mark loves it," she chuckled, taking a sip of the coffee and wincing. "It's too hot." "He's a normal guy. He helps," she said. "Not everyone can be like you with hands from the right place." "Normal guy," David muttered under his breath. He saw how Mark touched her, like she was just another bar girl. He wanted to say something, but the words didn't come. What could he say? If he told her he saw Mark groping her, she'd either laugh it off or accuse him of not trusting her. Or worse, she might not deny it. "Are you okay?" Kelly asked, narrowing her eyes. "You look exhausted." "I'm tired," he said, looking away. "It was a rough night." "Yeah, you look it." She stood up, patting him lightly on the shoulder. "Go get some sleep. I'll wake up the kids." As she went upstairs, David stayed seated, staring at his mug. The coffee cooled in front of him, but he felt like he'd been hit by a truck. Not physically, but inside. This wasn't just harmless flirting, it was real. Mark had touched her, and she had laughed. His wife. David stood and went to the window. Mark's house was dark, except for the garage light. He imagined Mark inside, working on something, grinning like he knew he had won. The blow to his pride burned like acid. He didn't cross the street, didn't storm over to Mark's. That wasn't his style. He didn't yell, didn't fight. He was silent. Always silent. Even when everything inside him screamed. The kids came downstairs. Sophie, still in her unicorn pajamas, and Ethan, his hair a mess, both yawning. Kelly made breakfast, chatting with them about school. David watched her smile, wink, and laugh like nothing had changed. But for her, maybe nothing had. Maybe it was just a game to her. But for him, it felt like a knife to the ribs. He grabbed his jacket, muttered, "I'll go for a walk," and stepped outside. The cold bit his cheeks and the wind ruffled his hair as he walked slowly down the street, past Mark's house. He didn't look at it. He didn't want to. But the image of Mark's hand, the way Kelly laughed, it stuck with him like mud on his shoes. He didn't know what to do. Remain silent, wait for it to fade, or confront her. For now, he just walked, every step a dull ache in his chest. After that Saturday, David changed. On the outside, nothing was different. But something inside shifted, an irreversible change. He no longer questioned Kelly about Mark or got tangled in details. His silence grew heavier, sharper, like a blade hidden in his pocket. He didn't know what to do. Confront Mark? Yell at Kelly? He wasn't that type. He fixed things, not broke them. But this situation wasn't something to fix. So he decided to dig, not for revenge, just for answers. After his shift on Monday, he stopped by Home Depot and bought 3 wireless surveillance cameras. The salesman asked if they were for the house or garage. "For everything," David muttered as he paid in cash. He hid the cameras in the garage and set them up late Tuesday after Kelly left for work, and the kids were asleep. The first camera was aimed at the yard and Mark's house, the second hidden in the bushes, and the third in the attic, focused on Mark's garage. He spent a couple of hours adjusting the angles, checking the footage through an app on his phone. The image was clear in night mode, and the sound was weak but enough to hear. He sat in the attic, watching Mark's empty garage, feeling both like a fool and a watcher. When he finished, he went to bed. The first entry came on Wednesday while David was at work. He saw Kelly walk to Mark's house on the app. No bags or packages, just walking quickly, like she had something to do. 5 minutes later, she left and went inside. It seemed harmless, but David noticed how she looked around before entering. He turned off the screen, unsure if it was about the coffee maker or something else. That evening, while Kelly made dinner, David checked the cameras again. This time, he saw Mark come out of the garage and approach Kelly, standing by the fence. He kissed her quickly and roughly. She pushed him away, but not forcefully, more like it was part of the routine. David watched the footage, feeling his grip tighten on his phone. This wasn't like the Saturday incident, but it was still something. When Kelly came into the kitchen, acting normal, he stayed quiet. She seemed unaffected, but for him, it felt like a knife to the ribs. Thursday brought more. Kelly said she was going to Mark's for screws for the nursery shelf. David didn't say much, but when his phone beeped an hour later, he saw her walk into Mark's garage again. This time, the camera in the attic caught them in the shadows of the garage. Mark pressing her against the wall, his hands under her jacket. The footage was quick, dirty, almost routine. David saved it, naming the folder Work, and added a password just in case. That evening, he asked her how the shelf went. She shrugged. Mark gave me the screws. I'll fix it tomorrow. David didn't press further, but inside, he felt something twist, a sick clarity. She was lying not about the screws, but about what was really going on with Mark. Friday got worse. David came home from his shift and found Kelly making pizza. He checked the cameras discreetly. The footage from 3 p.m. showed Kelly on her knees in Mark's garage, his hands in her hair. Less than a minute later, she stood, wiped her mouth, and left. Mark sat down, lit a cigarette. David watched it 3 times, the images burning in his mind until his stomach churned. He barely made it to the bathroom. David quietly vomited into the toilet, not wanting the kids to hear. Afterward, he washed his face and stared at his reflection. His face was gray, eyes red, exhausted. In 3 days, he'd gathered 5 videos, quick, dirty encounters with Kelly and Mark. There were no conversations, no emotions, just closeness. Each encounter was quicker and rougher than the last. This wasn't an accident, David realized. It was a pattern, a web that had formed behind his back while he'd been focused on work. He didn't confront her. He didn't show the videos, didn't punch Mark or yell at Kelly. Instead, he quietly observed her, laughing with the kids, preparing dinner, kissing Sophie goodnight. She was still his Kelly, the mother of his children, the woman he had loved for 15 years. But now he saw her differently, the one who laughed with Mark, who lied in his face, and he didn't know what to do with that. For now, he collected evidence like a detective, not ready to take action. But with each video, the pain grew. The weight of the footage sat heavy on his phone. His mind felt foggy from lack of sleep, but he carried on, waving flags at work and joking with his family. But every time he looked at Kelly, 2 women appeared before him, the one he knew and the one he didn't. Sunday night was quiet. The kids were asleep early. Kelly left for her night shift at the bar, telling him not to wait up. David stayed behind, the house silent except for the ticking clock and the wind outside. He sat on the couch, whiskey in hand, something he rarely drank. He poured himself a glass, the burn easing the ache inside. He thought about forgiveness, not in words, but in fragments, in images. Maybe it's just a crisis, he thought. Maybe she's just tired from the routine, the nights, from me. We've been together for 15 years, 2 kids, bills. She's lost herself somewhere in there. He remembered her at 20, full of dreams, now pouring beer for truckers. He sighed and took another sip. Maybe Mark's her way of letting go? He shook his head. Maybe it's my fault. I didn't notice, didn't ask, didn't give her what she needed. Forgiveness seemed possible, though not easy. He imagined talking to her, saying, I know, let's work this out. He could picture her tears, his hand on her shoulder, promising to try again. But then he opened his laptop, drawn to the same app on his phone. The latest video loaded. Time, 6:47 p.m. Less than an hour ago. He expected more of the same, another quick kiss, another routine encounter. But what he saw made his breath stop. Mark's Dodge was parked outside his house, the rear windows dark. Through the camera, David saw Kelly in the back seat, her hair disheveled, her top up, her bra to the side. Mark was on top of her, his hands gripping her hips. They moved slowly, lazily, like they were savoring it. David could hear her moan, a sound he hadn't heard in years. Mark whispered something, and Kelly laughed softly. David didn't blink. He watched, unable to look away. This wasn't a quick affair in the garage. This was personal. The way she moved, the way she held Mark. It was about him and her, not just closeness, but something deeper. His fingers trembled as he held the glass of whiskey. The liquid spilled, but he didn't notice. David realized this wasn't just about betrayal. It was something more, something he couldn't ignore. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. She was with him, not just physically, but emotionally, in a way he could never have imagined. David sat silently, staring at the screen, the last video playing in his mind. He turned off the laptop abruptly, slamming it shut. The whiskey glass tipped over, spilling onto the carpet, but he didn't bother cleaning it up. He sat frozen, breathing heavily, the image of Kelly's face and body etched in his mind. What he'd seen wasn't an accident, it was betrayal, calculated and brazen. She didn't just sleep with Mark, she enjoyed it, as if he wasn't even in the picture. He stood up and went to the kitchen, grabbing a beer instead of whiskey. The taste was flat, like water, but he drank it anyway. Back in the living room, he opened the laptop again, replaying the first 30 seconds to make sure it wasn't just his mind playing tricks on him. It was her, no question. And this wasn't just a mistake, it was something she'd been living. David's thoughts raced. He imagined sitting down with her, asking why, hearing her excuses, but he didn't want that anymore. I don't want her tears or her lies, he thought. Forgiveness, once a distant possibility, now seemed impossible. I can't forgive her, not now. Kelly would be home soon, back from her shift. David didn't know what he'd do. Show her the video, confront her, or stay silent until he figured it out. But one thing was clear. The woman he loved was gone, and he didn't know how to get her back. For the first time in a week, he felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, just emptiness. It was worse than anything else. The days after that night felt slow, like walking through thick tar. David didn't eat or sleep well, only worked, drank beer, and watched the recordings. He didn't talk much to Kelly. She asked the usual questions, but he remained quiet, going through the motions. The kids noticed he was off, but they didn't push. Sophie drew him pictures, and Ethan asked about his homework. David gave simple answers, his face blank, everything inside him rotting away. By mid-December, he had collected more than a dozen videos of Kelly and Mark's encounters. They were quick and dirty, captured in the garage, by the fence, in the car, each one more damning than the last. It felt like a show he couldn't stop watching. He studied each one, noting the time and place. One evening, while sitting in the garage with a beer, David noticed an old printer in the corner. An idea struck him, dark and sick, but with a bitter humor. He decided to make a calendar, a real one, with Kelly's face, her body, her betrayal. He got to work that night, the house empty with Kelly on shift. Using his laptop and printer, he created a calendar with images from the videos. He selected the most telling moments, her laughter, quick closeness, the intimate encounters. Each photo was cropped and enlarged, with short, cruel captions. Happy New Year, neighbor, and quick and to the point. The printer hummed as it spat out page after page, each one more satisfying than the last. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about making the truth tangible. David drank his beer, flipped through the calendar, and chuckled bitterly. His anger was finding a way out, though the pain still lingered. By morning, David had finished the calendar. 12 months, 12 scenes, 12 painful reminders. He called it Neighborly Love, in bold, blood-red font. He printed it, hid it in his toolbox, but knew this wasn't the end. He needed something more, something that would hit Kelly as hard as she'd hit him. Christmas was coming, and he remembered their usual family gathering. This year, he decided to do something different. He bought cardboard, glue, and a color printer, and while Kelly worked, he printed the calendar again, using glossy paper and vivid colors. He added a photo of their wedding, writing 15 years later beneath it. Then he made a recording, her moans, his grunts, their laughter, saved on a flash drive for the grand reveal. David imagined how it would play out. A Christmas dinner, kids opening presents, and then he would stand up, announce a surprise, and show everyone the calendar. Every frame, every moment. Let them watch. Let Kelly understand that he knew everything. He rehearsed not the words, but the actions, the projector, the video, and the look in her eyes when she saw it all laid out in front of her. Kelly didn't suspect a thing. She prepared for the holiday, buying sweaters for the kids, ordering turkey, and talking about decorations. David helped, nodding along, pretending. But every night, when she left for her shift or fell asleep, he added details to the calendar, focusing on December. Her laughter, her body, her betrayal. Christmas Eve arrived with a thin layer of snow, and the usual decorations went up around Maplewood. The house was warm and filled with holiday smells. The kids were gone, and David and Kelly were left for an adult holiday. She was in high spirits, decorating, singing, and hanging a wreath, something she hadn't done in years. David silently helped, but his mind was elsewhere, growing emptier by the minute. Kelly didn't notice, or maybe she didn't want to. By 7 p.m., guests arrived. Mrs. Crawford brought her famous pie. Jimmy from the bar brought beer. Neighbors arrived with wine and stories. Mark showed up last, grinning at Kelly and greeting David with a casual, "Merry Christmas." Kelly smiled back, too easily, just like she had in the videos. David nodded, but inside he seethed. The house was filled with laughter, food, and music. Kelly was the life of the party, joking, laughing, and refilling drinks. Mark sat on the couch, watching her intently. David stood by the window, beer in hand, silent, watching it all. He hardly spoke. But in his mind, the calendar was ready. The truth was waiting. By 8 p.m., the room was buzzing with drinks and chatter. Mrs. Crawford was telling a story, and Kelly turned up the music. David waited until everyone was seated, plates filled and laughter filling the air. Then he stood up, grabbed the attention, and cleared his throat. "I've got a little surprise for you all," he said, his voice firm but hoarse. Kelly raised an eyebrow, smirking. "What's this, David, trying to entertain us?" The guests laughed. Jimmy joked, "Not a dance, man." Everyone chuckled, but David didn't smile. He pulled out an old projector from behind the couch, set it up, and hung the calendar on the wall. The glossy pages glittered under the Christmas lights. Kelly's wedding photo was the first image, her in a white dress, him in a cheap suit. It felt wrong. Kelly frowned, but didn't speak. Mark's face was tense as he looked from Kelly to David. David clicked the button on the projector. "January," he said. The first slide lit up. Kelly laughing at the fence, Mark's hands on her. "Happy New Year, neighbor." The sound came on, her laughter ringing. The room froze. Mrs. Crawford dropped her fork. Jimmy cursed, but didn't finish his sentence. Kelly went pale, her eyes wide, but she stayed silent. Mark looked horrified. David clicked again. "February." The next slide showed Kelly against the garage wall, Mark's hands under her jacket. The sound was muffled, almost animal. "Is it warm in the garage, Kel?" flashed on the wall. The room shifted uncomfortably. Kelly clenched her fists, but didn't move. She stared at the screen like it was a sentence. Next, March. Kelly was on her knees in Mark's car, quick and rough. Her voice echoed, "Come on!" Linda covered her mouth. Tom turned away. Mark didn't speak. He just clenched his jaw and looked from the screen to Kelly, then to David. The slides continued, each scene worse than the last. Quick encounters in the garage, against the fence, in the car. The guests reacted differently. Some stared at the floor, some whispered. Kelly didn't cry or scream, she just sat, stiff, paralyzed. Finally, December. The backseat of the car, Kelly moaning, laughing. "Merry Christmas, Kel." The sound filled the room, her voice and his breathing, the creak of the seat. The room went silent, the only sound the fire crackling in the background. David turned off the projector, disconnected the flash drive, and tossed it on the table. He glanced at Kelly, then at Mark, then at the room of stunned guests. "Happy holiday," he said, his voice empty, emotionless. He grabbed his jacket, a beer, and walked out. The door slammed behind him. The room was quiet for a few seconds before chaos erupted. Linda started packing her things, muttering about leaving. Tom followed. Mrs. Crawford stood up, shaking her head. Jimmy grabbed his beer and slipped out. Mark stayed seated, looking at Kelly, who didn't respond. She just walked out, silent, through the back door. Kelly stood in the living room, staring at the calendar hanging on the wall, the wedding photo a ghostly reminder of everything. She walked up, tore it down, and threw it into the fire. The paper curled and burned, but it didn't matter. The damage had already been done. She collapsed on the sofa, covering her face. But there were no tears, just emptiness. Outside, David stood by his truck, finishing his beer as the snow melted on his jacket. He heard the guests leaving, the door slamming. But he didn't look back. He had done what he needed to do. He'd shown her the truth. Let them sort it out, he thought. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, but didn't drive away. He just sat there, looking at Mark's house, the lights now off. This was probably the end. But David didn't feel it yet, just a strange relief, a quiet emptiness. The morning after Christmas was cold and gray. The snow had melted into slush, leaving dirty streaks on Maplewood's sidewalks. The Grayson house was eerily quiet. No music, no kids, no scent of coffee. Kelly woke up on the sofa, disheveled from falling asleep there after the party. Her hair was tangled, her face drawn, and the events of the night seemed to weigh on her. She walked into the kitchen, poured water, but didn't drink. She just stared out the window at the empty street. David hadn't come back last night. His truck was gone before midnight, and she didn't know where he went. He returned around 10 a.m. The door clicked open quietly, and he walked in wearing the same jacket, his face hard as stone. Without a word, he placed the house keys on the counter. Kelly turned and froze. He looked different, older, with deeper lines around his eyes, stubble thicker than before, but his eyes were hollow. "David," she asked, voice raw, "where have you been?" He didn't answer. He moved past her into the bedroom and started packing a bag, methodically, like he was preparing for a shift, not leaving. "Talk to me," she whispered. "David, please." He didn't look at her. He grabbed boots from under the bed, zipped them into the bag, then went to the bathroom, tossing his toothbrush and razor inside. Kelly stepped closer, voice desperate now. "You can't just leave after all this," she pleaded. "Are you really going to stay silent? Say something." Finally, he turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. Her voice shook as she waited for something, anything. But all he said was flat and calm, like he was stating the weather. "The house is yours," he said. "The kids need a home. I'm leaving." She grabbed his sleeve, voice shaking. "No, you can't just leave. You humiliated me in front of everyone, Mark, the neighbors, everyone. Now you're walking away?" He shook her off, gently but firmly. "There's nothing to explain, Kelly. I've seen enough." She stepped back, her heart racing. "It was a mistake," she stammered, her words tumbling out quickly. "It didn't mean anything. I was confused. But I love you. We can fix this. For the kids. For us." He stood still, looking at her but hearing nothing. Just her fear, her attempt to hold on to something already gone. David turned away and picked up his jacket from the sofa. She rushed to him, grabbing his shoulder, turning him toward her. "You can't leave me like this," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Please, David, stay. Give me a chance. I'll do anything." He looked at her longer this time. He saw her tears, her desperation, the woman he had loved for 15 years. And then he spoke the words that shattered her completely. "I'm not sure if Ethan and Sophie are mine," he said quietly. "I'll get a test when I file for divorce." She froze, her mouth open in shock. The tears stopped. Her body went cold. The words cut deeper than anything else he could have said. She wanted to scream, to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. David didn't wait for her response. He grabbed his bag, the truck keys, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in as he stepped outside, the door closing quietly behind him, like a period at the end of a sentence. Kelly stood there for a moment, the silence of the house swallowing her whole. She sank to her knees in the hallway, her hands covering her face as the tears began to fall, slowly and evenly like rain. David drove off without looking back, past Mark's dark, empty house and out of Maplewood. He didn't stop, didn't look back. He just kept driving, the weight of everything pulling him down, but still, he felt nothing but exhaustion. Back in the house, Kelly remained alone. She knew the truth about the kids, but David's words about Ethan and Sophie felt like a final severing of their connection. It hurt, not because it was true, but because it was said with the intention to destroy everything they had left, and it worked. David checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of Hilliard, rented a room for $40, and tossed his bag onto the bed. He sat by the window, pulled out his phone, and texted a lawyer he'd been referred to a few years ago during a divorce case. "I need help with a divorce. I'll call tomorrow." He turned off the phone and poured himself a drink, the same whiskey from the night before, and gulped it down. He didn't yell or cause a scene. He simply left, as quietly as he had lived all these years. The house was Kelly's now, and he was done. The divorce would be fast, no need for drama, just taking half his savings, a paternity test, and leaving. He didn't care about forgiveness anymore. For days, he drifted through the fog. The motel was uncomfortable, creaky bed, bleach-scented sheets, and distant coughing from the neighboring room. But David didn't care. He didn't call Kelly, Didn't check on the kids, and didn't answer her calls. He sent a brief message to his sister Marge. "You have the kids until New Year, I'll sort it out." But didn't explain. He had already done what he needed. The emptiness gnawed at him. It wasn't anger or sadness, but a cold drive to finish what he started. The calendar burned, but the recordings remained. On December 28th, he sat at the rickety table, opened his laptop, and downloaded all the videos. 12 clips, each a reminder of Kelly's betrayal. He compressed them into an archive named Maplewood Memories, then found the neighbors' email addresses. Mrs. Crawford had AOL, Tom and Linda had Gmail, and Jimmy's was full of numbers, contacts exchanged over neighborhood help. David wrote a short, blunt email. "Hello, everyone. This is what was under our noses. Happy New Year." He attached the archive and sent it to 10 people. Next, he uploaded the archive to his union's Facebook group with the caption, "My ex and neighbor enjoy." He knew some would laugh, others would say, "Get a grip," but everyone would watch. The final step was Hilliard's community Facebook group, where locals traded old furniture and complained about noise. He posted the calendar, 12 months of Kelly and Mark, each month captioned with biting remarks. "Kelly Grayson and Mark Taylor are the stars of Maplewood. Place your bets on who's next." He didn't reread it, just sent it out and closed his laptop. An hour later, his phone buzzed with calls and notifications, but he didn't look. He knew the storm was brewing. Mrs. Crawford would cross herself. Jimmy would laugh and forward it to his buddies. The entire town would know, and Kelly and Mark would become the center of their scandalous gossip. By noon, Kelly had seen it. The house was empty, the kids at Marge's, and she sat in silence, the same quiet that had filled the house after David left. She tried to call him, begging him to come back and talk, but he didn't answer. The truth was out. The morning after Christmas was cold and gray. The snow had turned to slush, and the usual holiday cheer felt distant. Kelly woke up on the sofa, groggy and disheveled, the events of the night still sinking in. She checked her phone and saw David's message to the neighbors. Then she saw the archive email he'd sent. As the videos played, her world unraveled. The bartender from the Rusty Tap texted her, "Do you know your videos are in the union group? Everyone's laughing." She dropped the phone, not responding. Then a neighbor posted a link on the Hilliard Community Hub. Kelly opened it. 300 likes, 150 comments. The scans of the calendar with her and Mark were there. Comments flooded in from shock to mockery. She shut the laptop, but it was too late. Her phone buzzed nonstop, messages flooding in. She ran outside and stared at Mark's house. The lights were off, his car was gone. He had left, just like everyone else. She collapsed on the sofa, her face in her hands. "Everyone knows me now," she whispered. She wasn't Kelly Grayson anymore, the friendly bartender and mother. She was the one caught on camera with her neighbor. The whispers and laughter would follow her everywhere. Mark learned later he'd spent the night at his brother's place in Dublin trying to avoid the mess. But his brother showed him the Facebook post, laughing. Mark opened it, saw his face on every slide. The comments piled up, mocking him. His brother sent it to his friends, and the jokes started. Even the union group, where Mark occasionally hung out with David, was buzzing. Mark turned off his phone, but the damage was done. David, meanwhile, was in a motel, feeling numb. The notifications had stopped. The lawyer confirmed their meeting for January 2nd. David didn't feel joy or satisfaction, just a sense of emptiness. Kelly and Mark had become the town's joke, and everyone knew what had happened. But he wasn't trying to destroy them. He just wanted them to know he saw everything, and they understood. By January, David had moved on. He rented a small apartment in Dublin, leaving everything behind in the house. The divorce was progressing swiftly. He wasn't fighting over anything except a paternity test, driven by a cold curiosity. 2 weeks later, the results came back. Ethan and Sophie weren't his. The DNA match was less than 1%. David felt no shock, no anger, just emptiness. The children he had raised, loved, and cared for were not his. The illusion of his family was over. Kelly stayed at the house on Maplewood, hidden behind closed curtains. After the calendar was circulated and the town's gossip spread, she withdrew completely. The windows stayed shut and the porch piled up with garbage. She sent the kids to her mother in Cincinnati. "It takes time," she said. But for David, the time had already passed. The truth was out, and he was done. After everything fell apart, Kelly was left alone, trapped in her own home. She stopped answering calls and texts. She lost her job at the Rusty Tap after the customers laughed, and the neighbors stopped visiting. Mrs. Crawford left a pie at the door, but Kelly didn't even open it. She sat in the dark, sipping cheap wine and staring at the wall. The phone stayed dead and the TV was quiet. She didn't care. She had seen the paternity test, and the reality crushed her. The lawyer's letter confirmed what she'd feared. It wasn't Mark who fathered her children, but she couldn't face the truth. Her life, her family, everything she'd known was shattered. Mark disappeared after that night. No one saw his dodge, and his name became a joke. He left without a word. No calls, no messages, just gone. His colleagues at the shop said he didn't show up after New Year's. Some said he went to his brother's place, but no one knew for sure. Mark was gone, and the stink of his betrayal hung over Maplewood. David, on the other hand, moved on quietly. He went to work, waved flags, drank coffee with the guys, and kept to himself. They knew about the divorce, but no one asked questions. He got rid of the cameras and erased the footage. He didn't need to know anymore. The burden was now the town's to carry. By the end of January, he began to feel lighter. The emptiness in his chest started to fade, slowly. David bought a few things for his new apartment, just basics: a lamp, a cheap TV, and a coffee maker. He watched old movies and sometimes caught himself almost smiling, not out of joy, but because he was still alive. He didn't call his kids. He couldn't bring himself to tell them the truth yet. Marge kept him updated, but he only replied with, "I'll figure it out." On January 30th, he walked into a bar in Dublin. He ordered a Miller Lite and sat quietly. Half an hour later, a man in a Carhartt jacket sat next to him. "You're the guy with the calendar, right?" he asked. David nodded. "To him," he said, lifting his glass. The man raised his glass in a silent toast. "For your dignity, brother. Not everyone would have done that." David gave a slight, almost imperceptible smile as they clinked glasses. The whiskey burned, but the warmth spread through him. For the first time in months, he felt something shift inside him. It wasn't about heroism or victimhood. It was just him, surviving, making it through the storm. And maybe, just maybe, not everything was lost.